Hey everybody, welcome to this ShiftCare live webinar with Ian and Cecile and myself, Andrew. Today we're going to be discussing timesheets and how to best go about timesheets within ShiftCare. So we hope you get a lot out of this session. We're going to go through pay groups and allowance setups within the payroll system, as well as approving clock in and clock out times and adjusting shifts. We'll then go through some syncing and how to sync with your accounting packages. And we've got a live Q&A session as well. So as we're going through, if you want to ask any questions, you can just press on the Q&A button down the bottom of the screen. Just probably avoid using the chat, and we can just answer your questions as we go along. We'll also have the Q&A after as well. So if we can't get to your question during the seminar, just bear with us and we'll answer it as best we can as we go along. So Ian, if you can jump to the next slide. Thanks, mate. So yeah, at the moment we're in webinar mode, so audio and video is going to be muted for the attendees. And as I mentioned, just answer or ask your questions through the Q&A button down the bottom there. And we are recording this session, so if you come in late or you want to have a review of it later on, we'll be posting this out to registered attendees as we go along. With that, I'll pass you over to Ian, and Ian can kick off the session for us. Thanks, Ian.
Great, thanks, Andrew. Thanks, everyone, for joining. We've had some good questions through already, and we'll have to cover everything off. But yeah, as Andrew says, if you have questions as we go, please let us know. I'll just skip over this bit. So timesheets, we're going to be looking at this scenario with Marcus. He's had some shifts earlier in the week, and we'll sync those timesheets across to Xero in this case, but we'll also talk about how to do that for Quickbooks and MYOB as well. So whilst setting up staff members is the first step in getting set up. To actually sync the timesheets across, we want to group people together into their different pay groups. To get there, we go into account, pay items, and pay groups. I've got some pre-prepared pay groups here. So a pay group is like a earnings rate that someone's on. Your earnings rates might be categorized by different levels of experience, or depending on like the awards that you're adhering to, it might be age groups or experience. In this example, I've got different skill sets. So a gardening team, care workers, and registered nurse. When you first come to ShiftCare, there'll be a default there for you set up that you can either archive off or edit to suit your needs. If you need to rename a group, you can click edit and change the name. Example 1. And then within each of the pay groups, you can set the different times of the day and the different rates apply to. One thing to note is in ShiftCare, we don't control what's paid in the dollar amount, but we do report those different groups to your payroll system, and the payroll system applies those dollar amounts depending on the time of the day and the hours worked and that sort of thing. There is an account setting. So under account and settings, if you go down to time and attendance, the pay rate by default is based on the end time of the shift. You can adjust that to be the start time. And there's some other relevant settings such as timesheet precision. And you can set that to different decimal places. Additionally, on my account here, I've got auto approve if the shift clock in and clock out was successful. The success criteria depends on a couple of things: whether the clock in location check is enabled or disabled, If it's enabled, the address has to be an address that matches Google Maps, because by the app uses the phone's location to match against the Google Maps location for the shift. And then the other success criteria is that it's within this attendance threshold, so within 15 minutes. So if I was to clock in right now for a 12 o'clock shift, since it's 12:05, that would be the first part of the shift being approved, and then the second part being the clock out time. And I'll talk a bit more about that auto approving later on, but that's where you set that message in the account settings. So just to jump back to pay groups, as you set these up, I might want to add, if the gardening team starts, for example, working on a Sunday, I can edit, click copy. That takes the information from the line above, and I can change that to Sunday. Now I have some options here. So code is for MYOB. When you first come into the pay groups page, the system will ask you what pay group, which payroll system you're using. If you're, when you select that, some of this information becomes more targeted within the page. So if you select Xero, you'll only be asked to complete Xero information. If you select MYOB, it'll only ask you to create MYOB information. So from here, we're able to match up the earnings rates from Xero, or in this example here, the rates here match what we've got set in MYOB. So we're setting a weekday daytime to weekday, a weekday evening to a week evening. For example, it goes on Saturday, Sunday, for example. Now, when you're working with MYOB, you can input that code straight in. With Xero, there's an additional step. So we have to go to Actions and sync Xero pay items. If you haven't logged in for 30 minutes, Xero asks you to log in and allow permission for ShiftCare and Xero to talk to one another. Once we do that, we end up with a sync from Xero, and that tells us a few different things. So that gives us all the different earnings rates. So I've already set those earnings rates up in Xero, and I'll just bring that in to show you here. Earnings rates are set under the sort of account settings, and then when you're in there, under payroll settings, you'll get the pay items. So here I've already set the different earnings rates. You'll see some of those will be familiar. There are some other settings to look out for. Check the documentation for ShiftCare. There's some tips in there to help you get that configured. We'll come back to Xero in a minute. So now that I've got this set up, in this garden team, I'm missing a connection here between weekday evenings. So I just search for garden team weekday. I'm not seeing it. Let's bring Xero back up, and I can show you how to add that in. I don't have one, so I can just add an ordinary time earnings. Put that in the display name, And the rate per unit, the rate type is rate per unit. The rate type of units is hours. If everyone is on the same rate for that, you can put the number in there. And this is likely to be wages. Wages and salary, there it is. Now, when I switch back to ShiftCare, I just have to redo that sync to re-pull the information across. I get it. And garden evening. As well as pay groups, we use allowances. So allowances are things like sleepover allowance, and that's set to override hours. For example, where you want to pay a fixed amount for the shift, regardless of the length of time. So that's where we override hours. And if a shift has that attached to it, that allowance attached to it, we'll be paying just that fixed amount for that. Other relevant, there's lots of different allowance types, or might be relevant. Mileage and expenses are a very common one. If we've already done the sync and we've set those up, so they should now be in here. So for mileage, I can save that, and expenses, I can adjust that. Now, when it comes to, so I touched on Xero and MYOB. For QuickBooks, which uses KeyPay, their integration is slightly different in that the raw data there, KeyPay takes the raw data from the shift times more often than not. Oh, sorry. So uses that to drive the allowances and the awards that are applicable there. So now that I've got the pay groups and the allowances set up, I just want to jump back to the staff member, so Marcus here. Under his details page, we can go into the payroll settings and we can set up which pay group they should be in. The other thing to note for MYOB users, that's the employee card ID that goes into the external system identifier. ShiftCare and Xero, when they sync, they use the email address to match, whereas MYOB uses that card ID. And you can add other allowances to this. So, for example, if that person has a first aid qualification and you have to pay an additional amount, that allowance is actually slightly different to the normal allowances. So this is a permanent allowance, whereas the others aren't. Permanent allowance can be attached to a person, whereas the other allowances, they can be attached to a shift. So there's a slightly subtle difference in those. Now, if I jump over to Marcus's timesheet, I can set the time frame, and I'm just looking at this last week because that's my pay time frame. In this example, Marcus, because I've had to auto-approve the timesheet on, this person's clocked in, and we've got the scheduled start time and the scheduled end time. They've had their GPS location enabled, so that's been captured, and I could click through to Google Maps to check the location. Additionally, if I open the shift, I'm seeing those clock in and clock out times within the shift. The little pointer lets me click through. So because they're within that 15 minutes of the start and end time of the shift, the system's already approved that shift. So it's really helpful in that now as the manager, I'm only having to look at the shifts that haven't been approved. Or outside of that tolerance. So an example here, the person clocked out half an hour later than intended. I'm expecting to, you might expect here in the notes a reason why. So just as an example, the client needed an additional 30 minutes. So it's down to you then as to whether or not you want to approve that. And if I approve this time, it's going to jump from 1 hour 15 minutes to 1 hour 45, which lines up with the clock in and clock out time. So what you're doing is here you're approving that the clock in and clock out times. So if I redo this and reject the time, it asks me to give a reason. So I can give a reason. On the staff side, if they have notify attendance approval ticked, that person will get a message on the app to say that the shift's been approved or the clock in and clock out times rejected. So it's turned on for everyone by default. You can turn it on and off for individuals. So now that I've rejected that time, it's stayed at the scheduled 1 hour 25 minutes. Now, in the scenario where you do want to pay the staff member for that shift and also invoice the client, you can click edit and just change. I find it easy to copy and paste the time in there. So I'm going to update the shift. And that's adjusted then the shift to finish at 7:31, sorry. And if I open the shift details again, you can see that's all come back through. I could go into edit and advanced edit, and you can see client and carer time is adjusted as well. Now, on this shift, there's been an expense claimed, $14. There hasn't been any mileage. There is a mileage allowance, but there isn't an expense allowance. In this scenario, ShiftCare won't report that expense to the payroll system because the allowance isn't there. It's a safety catch, if you will, to stop people claiming for mileage or expenses when that hasn't been pre-approved by the scheduling team. So this shift here was 6 kilometres, and the mileage allowance, that's going to pass through not just the time, but also 6 kilometres for that person. If I open the shift again and just go into advanced edit, you can see that the allowance is under the shift section. So I can add my expense in here. Because this is a reoccurring shift, it's asking me whether I want to change the one shift, which shifts or all shifts. If it was a mistake that expenses should always be added to a shift, it's easy to update future shifts. If it's just a one-off, you can update the one-off shift. That's very similar to going through the edit process here, but going through and editing the shift gives you those repeat options as well. There's one other shift here. So this is a sleepover shift, and that's set to, if I edit that, the shift type set to sleepover. You can set night shift for a shift that finishes the following day. Those 2 shifts tell the system that the shift will run past one day and into the following day. And to pay the sleepover allowance, which will override the hours on the shift, we have this sleepover here. And at this stage, I'll just jump back to the schedule for Marcus. We've lined up the times of the shift here with the allowances. So Marcus's allowances as a care worker run run from 6 a.m. till 8 a.m. And then 6 a.m. to 8 p.m., 8 p.m. till midnight. So here we've got a shift scheduled that finishes at 8 at that cutover point. So during the day hours, we'll report those 3 day hours. The evening hours will report that. And then the sleepover shift that runs into the 6 a.m. will be reported as a separate item, and 6 till 8 for the normal day hours again, as that sleepover shift runs through the pattern. So just to jump back to the timesheet now from Marcus, I'm going to approve all of these. Now I'm approving them. You can reject them all. Rejecting them all keeps the time to the scheduled time, remember, but I'm allowing this additional time for the shift here. And from here, I can go into reports, timesheet. And I want to make sure that my times here, my date range, sorry, is going to line up with the pay period that Xero is expecting. So I'm going to sync across to Xero. If you were to use another platform other than Xero, you can come down to the bottom here and select MYOB, verified hours, or all hours. So I've just verified the hours previously. But if you don't want to go through that process, the system doesn't force you to do that. KeyPay and Quickbooks and Xero is down here to sync everyone at once. If it's your first time of syncing the hours across, my recommendation would be to just sync one person at a time for Xero, and that is a good practice only because if there are any issues that crop up, you'll be able to find out who's having problems, and it might be that the email address doesn't match or their setup isn't quite right. So I'm just going to find Marcus here. I'm going to sync across to Xero. Now, as I do that, that'll sync with Xero's API. My timesheet has gone across to Xero. So I'll just bring Xero across. So for an employee under payroll, I've already set Marcus up. Marcus's details, and his employment, we have to pick that when they start, their pay schedule, so you set that up in the account settings. And then for each individual employee, we want the pay template. So all of those different earnings rates. So Marcus was a care worker, so we're setting all of the care workers' amounts in there. And we're also adding the allowances in. So now that we've set that, when I go into the timesheet under payroll, we'll see that Marcus has a draft timesheet because we've just sent those hours across. And then we see for each of the dates that we've got in that time frame, in the pay week that we're running, the different hours under the different rates. So where Marcus had his $14 expense on the Tuesday shift, as well as the 1.77 hours, that's all there. And we can go through and approve that and go through Xero's workflow in terms of creating the payroll. If you're using MYOB and KeyPay, that just happens as a bulk sync. So when I click download, the system processes that in the background and pulls together all the information. And then you'll get the notification, an email or a notification up at the top here, When you click that, that goes through to your communications page, where you can pick up other exports that you've run. Then you can download that file. These, all the exports are in the file format that the systems are expecting. MYOB is a tab delimited file, and that's ready to upload straight into MYOB. So that's the workflow in terms of adjusting or setting up, and then when you've got shifts in place, how to approve times. You'll see that once they are approved, the systems shows that they're verified, and a verified shift can't be edited. And you'll see in the shift history that it's been approved. You can cancel that verification. Let's reopen that. That shift's then editable, but that any changes here won't follow through to Xero. It will be a case of having to cancel the draft timesheet, delete that, and then redo the sync if the hours aren't matching what you expect. So I think that wraps things up relatively quickly. See, we've got lots of questions coming in at this stage. Andrew, do you want to? Yeah,
so Frank asked, does ShiftCare sync to Payroller? I've just advised that it doesn't, but you can download the CSV file and possibly do an upload that way.
Yeah.
Robin, sorry,
just on Payroller, I think I've contacted their support team in the past. I don't believe they do sync with other platforms, unfortunately.
Okay. Robin's asked, can the timesheets be split into states? They've got separate taxation reporting processes across different states. So sort of asking what the best process would be for that particular instance.
Yeah, that's a good question. So they're different. So employees are in different states and we need to split those up. Might have to get back to you on that. I think the answer would be doing the sync to from the timesheet report. You'd have to download the file and then potentially split it up manually. That would probably be the best way I can think of on the spot. Alternatively, if you had two accounts and they were, running separately, that would be the other way to do that, I guess. Andrew, you're on mute by the looks of it, sorry.
Sorry, mate, thank you. Rick's asked, is there a way to cancel verification of multiple shifts in one go? For example, cancel a carer or participants' shifts for the entire week.
So from the scheduler, there isn't a way to cancel the verification from multiple shifts. It will be one at a time. We're working on a slightly different interface for the timesheets and managing those. That would be something that would come into that version of the timesheets. So I guess Rick, at the moment the answer is no, not on bulk, but in the future, yes.
Okay, good stuff. Kylie's asked, is it possible to filter out the timesheet report employees that haven't worked in the pay cycle? So I suppose in the timesheet report, it shows all of the employees. Is it possible to filter out the ones that haven't worked?
Not at this stage. So just an example, Kylie doesn't have any shifts in that week, so they're not there. But there isn't a way to filter those out at this stage.
Let's see. Let's see. Amit has asked, in timesheets, is it possible to have AM, PM, night, sleepover shift instead of weekday hours with Saturday, Sunday, and public holidays? So I think that's referring to the, yeah.
Those headings at the top. Yeah, you're right. That is something that we are working on as well, to align those more with the pay groups. At the moment, a weekday is any time of the day that is a weekday, but we do intend to split that out in time. Well, and when I say in time, that time frame is within the next 6 months, if not sooner.
Great stuff. This one's more, do you mind looking at a scheduling question? Christy's just asked that you might actually want to read this one in the Q&A. It's in the answered section.
Yeah, okay.
From Christy. It's just, there's a bit of information in there. So we have shifts that go from 3 p.m. to 9 a.m. in the morning. From 3 p.m. to 9 p.m. it's paid. Then from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. It's a sleepover shift. Then they're paid again from 6 to 9 a.m. They're having trouble setting this up to pay correctly and then transfer to Xero. The printed roster always calculates as 18 hours and not 10. Now, this comes up quite a bit.
Yeah, so this this example is kind of covers that to some extent. This would be, so you've got a 3 till 9 shift, so 3 p.m. We've got I guess a 5 till 8. The shifts have to be broken down based on the pay groups at the moment. So here we've got like a day rate. There's 3 hours in the day rate, and then when the pay group boundary, if I bring those up, might help illustrate it. We've got 6 till 8. So 6 till 8 is our day. We could add an evening rate in from 8 till 10, for example. So at 8 o'clock, I've got one shift finishing, another shift starting. So we'll be reporting this 3 hours at the day rate. The remainder of that active like daytime shift is at the evening rate, and then the sleepover shift, which is the fixed amount, that's paid at the sleepover allowance rate, and that sleepover allowance here is set to override the hours. So we're paying one sleepover allowance for that. Then as the shift kicks in the following day, I'll get rid of that so it's not confusing things. Our 6 a.m. till 8 a.m, we're going to pay another 2 hours at that daytime rate then as that clicks in. I think that answers that question, Christy. When we send the video out, we'll include some articles as well, and I'll make sure that one's in there.
Great, thanks, Ian. Rick's asked, is there a way to set a default allowance for a participant or staff member? They've got a lot of staff who accrue kilometres, so having to add the kilometre allowance per shift can be sometimes missed.
Yeah, that's Rick, that's a reasonably common question. We don't have that facility at the moment, but it's definitely something we intend to look into.
Okay. Ruth has asked, will it be possible on the app for the clients to sign that the shift or travel has been completed?
Yes. So I guess in our roadmap there is the scope to have electronic visit verification where a client is signing for the service has been completed. Obviously, that's not possible for all clients. We have another portal called ShiftCare Connect. That does allow, there is a setting within that that allows clients to approve shifts. And that would show up within the schedule as verified, and in the shift history that the client verified that. So there's a couple of ways to do that. Yeah.
Right. Jessica has asked that she has workers that clock in and clock out. However, it's not changing in the timesheets. I'm just wondering whether it's a settings issue or whether it could be because they work in rural areas and it might be a service issue. Might be something we need to investigate further.
Yeah, that does sound like something we will have to just check on. The clock in and clock out times, that's when it's registered. So if there's no internet at the time, then yeah, that could be a bit of a problem for the workers.
Right. Jessica, we can have a look at your account and check that in further detail and just see what's happening there. We can at least advise you whether it's an issue with the location and the service signal, or whether it's another issue. So leave that with us and we'll flag that for follow-up after this meeting. Well, Ian, that's, I think, all the questions we have at the moment, which is, if anyone's got any other questions, they can type them out or email that to us later on. Did you want to cover anything else off, Ian, or are you happy to wrap it up?
Yeah, I think that's going to cover everything I was hoping to cover today.
Great stuff.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for attending. If you've got any questions, we've recorded this webinar. We'll send the link out to you in a little while, and you can always get back to us through our support and chat channels. Our next webinar is on June 24. We're doing advanced invoicing, which is following on from our first invoicing webinar that we did a few weeks ago. It'd be worthwhile watching that if you haven't watched that already before you join the webinar on June 24. So we'll be covering things like split price shifts, provided travel allowances, and mileage and expenses. So again, thank you very much for joining us today, and we'll look forward to catching up with you next time. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.